Welcome back to part 2 of how to build a virtual reality lightsaber for VR. In this part, I'm going to go through how I clean up the model's topology, some mistakes I made when modeling, and how I unwrap the model for texturing in Substance Painter. Before jumping in, I just want to say, if there is anything in the series which I miss, or you want me to cover in more detail, please let me know in the comment section below and I can work on bringing you a better explanation and tutorial. Getting back to the model, the first thing I started with this model was reducing the poly count. After modelling it, I found I had some unnecessary support loops and too much detail to specific areas of the model. You can see here when I start to bring the poly count down for the dial, there were so many unnecessary edges in the mesh, so I tried to clean them up as much as I could. This was quite simple to do, but tedious. To remove edges, I used the merge by distance feature in Blender. This allowed me to reduce the number of edges quite quickly and use the vertices to control what was going where. I could have removed the little grips on the dial as well, but I wanted to do some renders later on, so I decided to keep these in. If I need to in the future, I'll probably remove these just for a tiny bit of performance that you would gain when on a mobile device. But until then, it's okay for what I was aiming for now. At this stage in the process, I realised I hadn't actually named any of the meshes that I had created in the scene. So what I decided to do was, as I unwrapped and cleaned up the topology of a single object, was to rename them. That way I could actually tell which ones I had already unwrapped, so I wouldn't be selecting meshes twice or going back over ones that I'd already done. When using the boolean modifier, although really useful for getting unique shapes and cutouts, it's often pretty bad for topology. It causes a lot of issues. To fix these, all I did was use the cut tool and then try and make quads out of the existing vertices that were there. If there was any vertices that were close enough to each other without disturbing the flow of the topology or the faces, I just merged them together. But you can see here I'm trying to make as many quads as possible, but also reduce the poly count at the same time. It's a fine line to try and get right, but in the end it reduced the poly count enough that I was quite pleased with the end result. So my main priority here was to fix all the models I had used a boolean object, as they were the ones that would take up the most time, and getting those finished first would be much better. But what I did with the top bit, although it's gone past it now, is I actually deleted 3 of them because I could fix one and then use the mirror modifier to actually duplicate that to the other sides. That way, rather than repeat myself 4 times, it was just as easy enough as just mirroring it, and that saved more time in itself. Once I'd retopologized it, I just fixed the UVs, and rather than actually placing them in the UV space from 0 to 1 coordinates, I positioned objects outside the UV area. The main reason for this was I was going to drop back in, which I do in a little bit, and reposition them manually, although I end up using a pack tool and it does okay, but it's not perfect. You can see here I did the same thing with the main body. Rather than fixing the topology on both ends, I just sliced the mesh in the middle, fixed the bottom UVs and the topology, and then mirrored it upwards. So that way I didn't have to do it more than once, because everyone will tell you that the UVs are the most boring part of 3D modeling. When it came to unwrapping the center body for the mesh, I actually put the seam towards the back where it would be hidden with the hand. That way, although I couldn't hide the seam through geometry, I could hide it with another object so it wouldn't be so pronounced. That way I could actually unwrap it using the face unwrap as well and get a nice flat UV face from it. This actually worked really well in the end and provided enough surface area to get a nice amount of detail to the final model. I often find with certain meshes that a good way to hide UV seams is to use hard edges. Unfortunately, in certain situations this doesn't work too well, as you've got to think a bit more creatively of how you unwrap a model. But for this lightsaber, it actually worked pretty well to create a uniform UV islands for most meshes. And you can see here I'm just bringing them into the scene and actually applying them to the UV space now. The idea was so I could get an idea of textile density and how well they would take up space. I also tried using one of the Blender's flatten tools, I believe it is, but it didn't really work out too well, and due to time constraints I couldn't really go in and manually line up faces. So I kind of just leave these how they were coming out, because there is ways to fix this in Substance Painter as well. Up until this point in the process, I actually forgot about these little edge blocks that were on the side of the lightsaber, but because of my name conventions and renaming as I went along, it actually helped me remember that I needed to do them, which was quite nice at the end. And then I actually moved on to the button. So you can see here I'm fixing the topology by connecting some of these vertices. Although I'm not removing topology and adding it, I've removed it in other places that this is okay to do. And you should always have vertices connected for quads or tris. If you can, keep it with quads, but if not, maybe like push it to tris a little bit. As long as your normals are alright, you're probably safe to go with it. The final step now was to just unwrap the button, and to do this I've done the same as what I've done all the way through it, just select the faces and then an unwrap, and it actually worked pretty well. So at this point I actually merge all the meshes together because I want all the UVs to be on one island or one texture sheet. That way I can see how they're lining up. And I actually realized there were some issues with some of the meshes due to their scale. I was able to fix this by using Apply Object Transform within Blender on the specific meshes which had ununiform UVs. This actually helps scale them and proportion them correctly once using the unwrap again. And then from there, with the object all combined, I actually just done a select all and then packed all the UVs into one UV space. But you can see here I actually missed the bottom faces, so I just used the edge select and then go back through to add them back in. And that's really it for unwrapping. It's a boring, tedious process, but unfortunately it has to be done. And I'm quite pleased with the organisation that came out of them on the UV sheet. And the next step is to just jump over to Substance Painter and start texturing. If you like this video and don't want to miss out on more like it, please consider subscribing. And if you'd like somewhere to drop in and hang out while getting some help from other developers like yourself, we have a Discord which I'll link in the description below. Until next time, stay safe and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!